So transporting wedding cakes. Let's have a think about that and a few bits and pieces about that. I think the first thing to think about is whether you're going to be delivering the cake or whether the customer is going to be collecting it. Now, most wedding cake bakers, in my experience, excuse me, I had too much tea. Most wedding cake bakers, in my experience, prefer to deliver. I prefer to deliver and set it up and all that kind of stuff. And most couples want you to. But there is obviously occasionally someone who wants to collect it. Perhaps they want to drive it somewhere. Or in fact, I've got one next week where it's only a 2-tier, it's a 6 and an 8 inch, but with loads of sugar flowers on it. But it's been collected. The wedding is at a private house, so on and so forth, and they would prefer to collect it. So, you know, who am I talking? So we'll talk about collections in a minute, but we'll talk about deliveries. Now, I'm going to talk mainly about what I do, but it's one of those sort of horses for courses things, really. Some people have their definite ways of doing things, definite things they wouldn't ever do, and definite things that they would do, yet the next baker along would do completely the opposite. So it really is a question of finding out which way works for you best, and which way is least stressful for you. I think that's the key, because keeping your stress levels down is one of the most important things when you're a wedding baker, because you know there's a bottom line of stress that will always be there because of the event, and it's, you know, what it is. But you want to keep that line as low as possible, because if you get stressed, you know, that's obviously when things get wrong, and so on and so forth. So the idea is with transporting cakes is that you do it in the way that will result in a less stressful you. Okay. So with that in mind, this is generally what I do. Okay. So depending on the size of the cake, I will either stack all of it with a central dowel and transport it like that, or I might stack the bottom tiers and transport it with if it's got 3 tiers, or 4 tiers, the other tiers to put on when I get there, or I will transport all the tiers separately. Now, generally, this depends on a few things. This depends on the size of each tier, because if you stack a 12-inch and a 10-inch, even without any other tiers, that's a bit heavy. And I physically can't, I've got weird arms and I can't lift things that are very heavy. So if you've got big, heavy tiers or deep tiers, then the chances are you're going to want to move those separately. If it's a smaller, for example, I've delivered a couple of 4, 6, 8 cakes, and those are quite small, and those aren't very heavy at all. And I've transported those with a central dowel. In fact, there was one. In fact, it was the first one back after lockdown in May. Was it May 2021? They were still only allowed 15 guests, but weddings could still happen. And it was a little 4, 6, 8-inch cake, and I transported it. And the drive must have taken, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, it was what was it, about an hour and a half drive? It was up to Hever Castle, if you know Hever Castle, it's a beautiful place. And it was moderately warm. But 4, 6, 8, and it was textured buttercream, so it was like buttercream with the, you know, the palette knife, the lines on it. Central dowel. I'd put it in the fridge overnight, so it was really chilled. I know some people don't chill cakes and say you shouldn't chill buttercream cakes. I do, and I've never had a problem with it. If you're not someone that chills your cakes, then just, you know, have it central doweled and have it ready. But I transported that without a problem, and I could lift it without a problem. So if it's a smaller cake, I would stack it all, central dowel it, make sure that the bottom cake is stuck to the board it's on. If it's sugar paste cakes, I will always cover my bottom tier with the board as well, if that makes sense. So I don't put the cake on and then do the strip of sugar paste around it. I never do that. Bottom tier is always sugar paste and then onto the board as well. And that actually gives it a bit more stability if you're transporting it. It's not going to go anywhere if you do it like that. So that's how I do that. So the question of whether to stack or not to stack really depends on how big the cake is, whether you've had to do a lot of complicated work to it before you transport it. I did a cake, when was it, last year, the year before, that had drapes down it. And that's quite a difficult thing to do once you've delivered it. So I had to do all that and then take the whole cake. So central dowel, luckily it wasn't, and you know, it was square actually. It wasn't an enormous cake, but it was fairly heavy. But because of the drapes, I had to do all that in the kitchen and then transport it as a finished article. I think the sugar flowers I put on once I got there. I rarely put on sugar flowers to transport. I do that when I get there. So that is the to stack or not to stack question. As far as actually in the car, I think most of us know that you put it in the boot of the car. If you've got one of those non-slip things, or the thing that goes in the footwell, you know, those rubber things, you can put those under the cake. But to be honest with you, most cakes are heavy enough that they're not going to shift around in the boot of your car. I've never opened a boot and seen cake all over the place. And I don't drive like a granny, as they say. So and particularly that, you know, that your 10 and your 12 inches, they're not going to go anywhere. They are heavy. So don't worry about them, you know, banging about in the boot of the car, because they just don't. They just don't. And to be honest, because, you know, if it's a 3-tier cake, you've got 3 boxes, you wedge those in carefully, and then I have my toolkit. I'll talk about toolkits in a minute. And then I have, you know, any other thing. So I sort of make sure it's all fitted in, so everything's quite snug in the boot. I mean, I haven't got an estate car. I've only got it's a Ford Focus, so it's a moderate sized boot, but it's not enormous. So I have to be quite careful with how everything fits in. And of course, I leave myself plenty of time. I think that the thing that is going to make you stressed is if you think, oh, I'm late, I've got to get this in the car and I'm running late. So make sure you leave yourself enough to plan yourself in the time. Give yourself a good half an hour. You won't need half an hour probably, but leave yourself half an hour to actually get everything in the car. It's these things that you don't think about, do you? You think, oh, I've got to be there at 11, so I've got to leave at 10:30, whatever. And you don't think about the logistics of actually getting the car from the kitchen to the boot. So leave yourself a good half an hour to actually pack everything in the car. The other thing, oh, hello, Louise. Hello, Victoria. Hello. The other thing that I always do is with each cake, and each cake is always slightly different, I always think what could be damaged on the way with each cake. And if it does get damaged, how am I going to fix it when I get there? So my toolkit that I take with me, I've got one of those boxes, the Hobbycraft ones with the little handle, and they open out, and you've got the bottom layer and the middle bit, and I've got one of those. And in there, I have certain things that I keep in there all the time, but I might put different things in there depending on what the cake is. So if it's a buttercream cake, I will put in a piping bag with the buttercream in. Okay, usually straight from the fridge, because then it's, I mean, it doesn't matter that it's not in the fridge for ages, it's only buttercream. It's not like it's cream cheese or anything like that. So I'll put buttercream in there. I'll put a palette knife in. I might put some of my little, you know, the little palette knives that you make butter flowers with, the little pointed ones. I find those really useful for sort of touching up and things. So I've got some of those, so I'll put those in. And piping bags and extra nozzles, because you never know when a nozzle might be useful. And if it's a sugar paste cake, I will put in my smoothers. Smoothers. What else will I put in? Oh, icing sugar. You know, a dredger in case I have to smooth it out. And there's, you know, I always think worst case scenario, what could go wrong, and how will I fix it? You know, 99.9% of the time I never have to use them, but that's fine. You know. Oh, gloves. I always put gloves in. What else? I wrote a list here. So gloves, yeah, tools, things like, you know, your flour tool, your Dresden tool, your little pokey tools that are quite useful if you've got details on your cake that might need poking. Pokey tools are quite good. Brushes. So you always, when I've set up, I always give it a brush to get rid of any little crumbs or anything that's strayed onto the cake by mistake. Spare bits and pieces, spare flowers. If it's a cake with sugar flowers, I generally take the sugar flowers separately. I'll put them in a cake dummy or polystyrene, and they're all stood up, usually, unless they're leaves, in which case I lay them down. Depends what they are. And then I place them when I get there. So I have my gloves so that I can do that. So I'll take jumbo straws, florist tape, scissors, wire cutters, those kind of things, if that's what I'm doing when I get there for that. Yeah, palette knives. Basically, take as much, if in doubt, take it. If you're thinking, will I need that? Will I take it? Because, you know, at the end of the day, if it sits there unused, so much the better. Oh, and I always take a bit of spare ribbon, because you never know. Ribbon can be quite useful for covering up a knock or a bash or something, if you're, you know, if you're desperate. So think about your toolkit. Think about, you know, what could get damaged on this cake. Worst case scenario. What could fall off, what could this, that, and the other, and how will I mend it? So take all the bits and pieces that you need for that. So that's sort of as far as, oh, morning, Tanya. That's as far as you transporting it goes. The other thing I would say is when you get there, first of all, I always contact the venue beforehand if it's one I don't know. Even if I do know it, I contact them and say, I'm arriving at usually 11 a.m. Is this okay? And they'll say, yes, that's fine. Or they'll say, would you mind arriving at 3 or whatever? So we sort out arrival times. If it's a venue I don't know, I will always say to them, is parking okay? Are there any stairs? Where's the best, where do I park for the, you know, the best entrance, if you like? Because there have been times before where I've parked at a hotel's entrance and found out afterwards that I could have driven to the kitchen door and done it in half the time rather than take the cake through the whole hotel. So find out where's best to park, where the best entrance is, so that you can get your cake in and out without too much bother. When I get to a venue, generally, unless it's a heat wave, really hot day, I will leave the cake in the car. I will take my toolkit, mainly because then I haven't got to carry loads of other things. I'll take it in. I'll find someone, usually the manager, say, I'm here for the cake. Where do I want it? You know, where do you want it? I find out where the cake's going to be. I put my things down, assess the situation, check the tables steady, because they aren't always. And then I go and get the cake and bring it in and then do what I need to do. Because if you get the cake out straight away, as soon as you get out the car, there's a potential for you stood there with the cake while they wait for the manager to tell you where it's got to go. And if you've had the aircon on in your car for the journey, your car is likely to be cool enough. And that's the other thing I try and do. If I can, I'll try and park in shade. So when you go into a car park, if it's a hot day, you're better to park in shade than nearest the door. Because it just gives you that extra bit while you're, while you're going in and assessing and seeing where you've got to go. Okay. And just bear in mind that it can be a bit mad, particularly if it's a small space, because you've got your florists coming and going, you've got photographers around, you've got, the bar people taking bar stuff in. So it can be a little bit hectic. But usually, people are quite accommodating. They know that the cake has arrived, then, they'll help you out. So that's it for sort of you delivering it. Anyone if you've got any questions, do ask. No questions. And then what I will do, we've talked about written instructions. I will, give my written instructions as well. If someone is collecting, I will do my information sheet. I did put it in the group for the Wednesday question about how you tell your customer things. I can't remember what I said, but there's a picture of it in there. But if someone is collecting, I will make sure that their information sheet has written instructions about how to transport. And I will also say it verbally as well, double whammy. So there's no danger that they're going to sling it on the passenger seat and go, tongue 20 around the corners on their way home. So written instructions, and make a point of saying, put it in your boot. Have you got space in your boot? In fact, even before they come and collect, you can say, make sure you've got space in your boot for this, particularly if it's a bigger one. Preempt it, get them prepared for it, because you don't want them to turn up with a boot full of, I don't know, foldable chairs or something and say, oh, I've only got room for it on the passenger seat. God, can you imagine? So preempt it if you can, and say, make sure you've got space in your boot. So the one that I'm doing next week, because it's got lots of sugar flowers on it, it's a sugar paste cake, which makes life slightly easier, because what I am going to do is, once I've placed the flowers on it, I will carefully wrap it in cling film, because the cling film will just hold the flowers in place and stop them shaking, because it's when they shake that they can shatter. So I will put cling film on it. In fact, I might take some photos and I'll put them in the group so you can see. Wrap it in cling film, and then obviously give them instructions about what to do when you get it, where you're going to put it. So that is what I will be doing. But again, there'll be written instructions, and I'll be telling them, make sure it's in the, but I might even carry the cake out to the car and say, there you are. I'll put it in the car for you. But things like, because people don't know, it's funny, isn't it? People don't know that actually they need a hand underneath the cake. They try and grab the sides of the box like that, don't they? And you're going, no, put your hand underneath it. Why do people do that? It's weird, isn't it? You'd think it was fairly obvious, wouldn't you? But anyway, so that is what I would do for if they're collecting. So there is a bit of pre-planning involved with this. So if they're collecting, beforehand, tell them that they need a space in the boot of their car. If you're delivering, the pre-planning involves talking to where it's going, the venue, or if it's someone's house, talk to them about where you park and all that kind of stuff. Think about what might go wrong. I know we don't like thinking about that, but you have to sometimes. It's practical. And then when it doesn't go wrong, it's brilliant, because it's like, oh, that's but it does ease the stress if on your way there, you think, oh, it doesn't matter if it gets knocked or whatever, because I've got my piping bag and I've got my palette knife and I can easily mend it. It's not a problem. You know, it does ease the stress very much if you've got all that, you know, preempted, and you've got all that, you've got your emergency situation dealt with before you get there. That's it. I wrote a little notes and notes. Oh, I put IKEA blue bags. You know those big IKEA bags that you can buy? I think it's 50p from IKEA. I find those brilliant for putting cake boxes in with cakes in, because when you put them in the car, you've got the handles, and when you lift them out, you can just lift the hand. You haven't got to try and get your hand underneath the box. You can just lift them. And I find with some sizes of cake, actually, I can put 2 of the tiers in one box and just lift it with the handles. And it keeps it lower to the ground, which is always good. It means that it's, when it's in your boot, it's slightly snugger as well. So if you've got access to those IKEA blue bags, get those, because they are brilliant for, say, transporting tiers, because you can lift the handles and you haven't got to get your fingers underneath and tip the cake and all that stuff. So handy tip there. There we go. So I think that was all I had to say about that. Are there any questions? If you've watched this on replay and you do have a question, just pop it in the group, of course. You know, that's how we roll, isn't it? And do let us know if you have transported a cake and you've got any tips or hints, or you do yours slightly differently. Please tell us about it, because, you know, I've told you about how I do it. It might, you know, there might be a better way of doing it or a better way for you. And as I said right at the beginning, it is horses for courses. What someone has as a must-have, another person would be a don't do that. So so do let us know if you've got any hints or tips or anything that you do that's particularly useful. All right. So I hope it is. Yeah, honestly, Tonya, those blue IKEA bags, when I used to do markets, they were just a game changer. I'd put all my boxes into the blue bag, and now I just have 2 bags to carry instead of loads and loads and loads of different. We love IKEA. Is it IKEA? I think they call it IKEA. We love IKEA. So yes, so use those, because they're just brilliant. There we go. So I'll leave you to it. Have a lovely day, a lovely weekend, and if you do have any weddings coming up and you're doing some weddings, do show us pictures. We want to see pictures, and do share with us anything you've learned from what you've done, or any hints or tips you've picked up, or anything, because we want to know. We want to know all your wisdom. That would be great. Thank you. I've got 2 weddings next week. So one's a collection, and I'll show you how I package it up. And the other one is a delivery. I'm trying to think where it is now. I can't remember off the top of my head where it is. I think it's a local one. But I've got some slightly unusual cakes to make for those. She wanted, this is one that actually was due for 2020, got postponed twice. Then I didn't hear from her for a couple of years. And then in January, she said, I'm so sorry for not getting in touch with you. We've had an awful time. We've now got the wedding on in June. Bless her. But she's not only got a 2-tier cake that I've made some sugar flowers to go on, but she's also got some like champagne glasses, and she wants Swiss rolls that are like candles. So I've got to make some. I have trialed it, and it does work. So Swiss roll on its end, covered in sugar paste with some with a big, like a poppy anemone thing on the top. So there's going to be a lot of ganache involved to keep the thing solid and stop it going. We've yet to see if it will be a major success, but I'll share with you what I've done, you know, just to It could be very amusing. It could be perfect. It could be, so we'll see. Anyway. Oh, you're very welcome, Tonya. Yes, very welcome. Don't get stuck in IKEA, the marketplace where you go, oh, it's only 50p, and you end up spending 100 quid, don't you? Oh, you're very welcome, Louise. Have a lovely day too, my lovely. Yes, go and enjoy the sunshine. Go and get some lovely sunlight on you, because it's very good for you. And I will see you next time. I can't remember what, I don't think I've planned anything for June yet, but I'll think of something. I'll come in and talk to you about something. All right. Have a lovely weekend, everybody, and I will see you soon. All right. Bye.